I'm in possession of 90 pages of never-before-seen details of contracts between Palantir and the Government of Canada. And in today's video, I'm going to tell you exactly how I got my hands on these documents, as well as dig into what's inside of them, because there's some really interesting, insightful tidbits about contracts that Palantir has with the Government of Canada, including the Special Forces of the Canadian Army. Now, around 16 months ago, I submitted an access to information request to the Government of Canada, requesting details on all contracts and negotiations over contracts between Palantir and the Canadian government. And it's taken a ridiculously long time to get this information that I have today. But now I partially understand why it took so long, because these 90 pages that I have here include details of contracts between the Canadian Special Forces and Palantir Technologies, much of which is actually heavily redacted because they had to go through line by line and redact a lot of what's in these documents for reasons of national security. However, what I finally did end up managing to get released is still interesting, still has a lot of useful insights in it, and will actually show us why, especially one of these contracts here in these documents, could be a huge step forward for Palantir in terms of getting its foot in the door and then leveraging this contract to get more contracts, contract extensions, and also larger contracts with the Government of Canada. And ideally, what we're seeing here in this country is something that we could be seeing around the world with different countries that are allies of the US and the Western alliances. So let's dig into it. In these 90 pages, I have details on two major contracts between Palantir and the Canadian Special Forces, as well as some behind the scenes information on what happens when Palantir is negotiating a contract with the Government of Canada and the process that it takes to get these types of contracts approved. Now, I'm going to skip over some of the boring stuff, and obviously a lot of this has been redacted. So really what I'm going to focus on is one contract, which is a major contract between Palantir and the Government of Canada to provide an intelligence processing tool. So you can see here on this first page of the document release that I got, the intelligence processing tool is the title of the contract, and this was signed on March 27th, 2020. It's a 5-year contract, meaning it'll go to 2025, but you'll see as we dig into some of the later documents that there is also an option for extension, which realistically will probably be exercised for reasons that we'll see later on. The total amount of this contract is $14,359,980.68 over 5 years. Now, the interesting thing about this contract is that there is no information about it on the Government of Canada website, where they're supposed to publish details of major contracts that the Government of Canada has signed with companies like Palantir. Now, you can see here that the only contract that shows up when you search for Palantir Technologies is this $1 million contract between Palantir and the Department of National Defense, which was actually for the pilot to this current program that I'm talking about right now. And you can see the details of it, that it was around a $1 million contract in 2019, so 1 year before this 5-year contract was signed. And this was for also intelligence processing tool, the Palantir intelligence processing tool. But this $1 million contract was a very limited pilot version of what we now have details on. And so this is the first useful piece of information that we can see, okay, Palantir had established a pilot, a trial for an intelligence processing tool with the Canadian Special Forces. And then after that 1-year term, it was determined that the tool was so useful that they would extend for a 5-year contract with an option to renew. And that is exactly the type of thing that we want to see with Palantir, which is higher net dollar retention, where not only are they going out and signing lots of new clients, but they're leveraging their existing clients into bigger deals and longer deals and higher value deals. And when that first $1 million pilot deal was signed, we actually had some news articles that came out talking about how Palantir was working with the Canadian Defense Department, but you will not find on the Government of Canada's website any of the details that I now have in my possession. Now, of course, they haven't released any highly sensitive information to me. They've redacted those sections, but what they have released has still never been seen publicly. And so we're going to dig into that now. For example, though, just so you can see what I'm working with, this is page 16 of the 90 pages, and they've more or less redacted everything useful from it, where they talk about what resources the contractor, i.e. Palantir, should have during the period of this contract. So we don't get to know that, unfortunately. Also, we apparently don't get to know much about the definitions that are involved in this contract, because that is completely redacted. We also don't get to see very much about the objectives of the contract, although we can infer what the Canadian Special Forces are trying to accomplish with this intelligence processing tool, because it says that CANSOFCOM, which is the acronym for Canadian Special Forces, prepares for and conducts operations as directed to promote peace and security, and this is worldwide. So this intelligence processing tool must be used on deployments abroad in different countries to collect various disparate pieces of intelligence and to accumulate them into a useful system that can provide recommendations on what to do and where to go next. And if we look at page 80 of the documents I have here, there's a better explanation of what the intelligence processing tool actually is, which is the intelligence process involves organizing information coming from multiple sources and databases so as to present authoritative, relevant, and timely intelligence products in a way that allows commanders and operators to develop a comprehensive and current understanding of their operational environment. Then we have to scroll through quite a bit of more redactions before we get to something useful. For example, on page 26, there's this table, table 3, option 4, blank, redacted. But what I'm inferring from this is that the redacted is option 4, contract extension, or something along those lines. Because if we count the columns here, you can see that there's 5 columns for the contract and then 5 additional columns, 10 columns total, which I'm inferring to mean that this is a 5-year contract, which we already know, with an option to extend for another 5 years, which would seem reasonable. But all of the really interesting information that we can pull from this comes later on. For example, on page 48, we can see that based on this experience, which is probably referring to the 1-year pilot trial contract that Palantir had with the Special Forces, the Canadian Special Forces conducted an option analysis that concluded that Palantir blank, probably Palantir Gotham, IPT, or intelligence processing tool, was the best solution available. And it goes on to say that, however, the 1-year contract provides limited functionalities within the intelligence sharing alliance. Specifically, as this procurement was meant for a single unit and its needs, the contract is unable to provide access to the multiple Canadian Special Operations Forces command users to intelligence processing tool applications and functionalities that assign users roles and access. The Canadian Special Operations Forces Command will leverage any lessons learned from the current contract and the information provided by our allies and other government agencies that already use the IPT to inform the tasks in the proposed contract. Now, this is a very interesting paragraph because there's quite a few things that we can pull out from this. First of all, the fact that the pilot contract between the Canadian Special Forces and Palantir was only for one single unit, whereas this is expanding access to multiple different units and multiple different users, but also the fact that Canadian allies are using the exact same intelligence processing tool applications, and that this is key to be able to share information and to have interoperability. And that is one of the main things that, for example, NATO allies are concerned about, is interoperability, so that when they're on operations together abroad, their different intelligence systems can talk to each other, and they can actually use the intelligence that's produced by other countries in a useful way. And so this is suggesting to me that some group of allies, I'm not sure if it includes all of NATO or if it's Five Eyes or if it's just the US and few select key allies worldwide, are essentially having to buy this from Palantir to be able to actually speak to each other on an intelligence agency to intelligence agency level and to leverage that to actually conduct operations abroad. And this is the type of impact that we could see having a snowball effect, where if it ends up becoming a necessity to have this tool to be able to actually work and have interoperability amongst allies, then this could be expanding not only to Canada, but to other NATO allies or US allies around the world, which is huge. And in fact, at the top of page 49 of these documents, it says that an options analysis was conducted, and it was determined that the acquisition of the intelligence processing tool was the only viable option that can meet the key requirement. And then the actual key requirement is redacted, but we can probably infer from that the ability to have interoperability with allies or something along those lines. So in this case, this was a sole source contract, meaning that it wasn't a competitive bid. The government didn't go to a bunch of different companies and ask them to provide their best offer on, how much would it cost to procure this software. They only went to Palantir because it was the only viable option. I had to come inside to finish the rest of this video because it's so hot out there. I live in Panama now, by the way, that it's so hot, my camera shut down. So here I am to finish. Anyways, as I was saying, this contract is confirming that Palantir is the only firm capable of fulfilling the requirements of the intelligence processing tool. And this is why Canada had to sign the exclusive sole source contract with Palantir for 5 years and then the option to come back for more. And you can guess that other countries, other defense departments or militaries around the world are probably encountering the same situation, because there is only one provider worldwide that is able to give militaries what they need in terms of security, in terms of the ability to actually process tons of information that is top secret or at a secret level and can't be shared, has to be compartmentalized, but then also has to be interoperable amongst the different allies. It's super complex, this type of stuff, and Palantir is the only company that can provide it. And really the perfect quote to summarize how important this is that to address these limitations and match the operational capabilities of our allied nations, Canadian Special Forces is seeking approval to enter into the proposed contract to deploy the IPT at an enterprise level. So from a $1 million pilot contract to an enterprise level contract comprising of a 5-year deal with the option to extend. That's huge. Now there's just a couple more interesting points that I want to highlight in this video. First of all, on page 50, under additional factors for consideration as it pertains to this specific contract, it says that the project has the potential to limit future competition, because the Canadian Special Forces is saying that competition may be limited for possible future maintenance and support services as Palantir holds the intellectual property rights to the software, and the Canadian Special Forces Command, redacted, but it probably says something along the lines of, is becoming reliant on this software and it will be difficult to switch. And this is another big positive signal for Palantir's growth, which is that not only are they going out and getting new clients, but their old clients are finding that the product is so useful, and that since Palantir is the only one that can provide it, they really don't have any option to switch. And so there is limited future potential competition for this, which means that Palantir can leverage this to build a larger snowball. So there you have a high-level breakdown of what I got from my access to information request. Now there's obviously more information contained in these documents, some of which could actually be useful. So if anybody's actually interested, I would consider posting this somewhere online for other people to actually access and take a look at. And I would also definitely recommend other people that live in democratic countries submit similar access to information requests to their own governments, because as we see in this case here, this is a contract that was not published on the Government of Canada website, and a pretty substantial contract, $15 million over 5 years with the option to extend. And so it's likely or even probable that other countries around the world with similar access to information laws might have some more useful information that we can get. Although it did take me a very, very long time to access this information because of the national security implications, and it did come heavily redacted. But still, you never know. So that's it for today's video. Hopefully you found this interesting and informative, and I'll see you in the next one.